Good morning. Today is the 26th day of Shvat, the 5th of February. And people ask why I have a problem with the date. Because I don't know the English date. If I have no reason to know it, I don't know it. We're going to learn a quickie, which is the continuation. That's the other side of sanctifying God, is now to not desecrate God. And to, as we'll see, the word in Hebrew is chilul Hashem. And this has a very interesting meaning. Lechalel et Hashem.
Make profane.
To desecrate, to profane, to... The opposite of sanctifying. And so he says, שלא לעשות דבר שיתחלל בו שם שמיים, שנאמר ולא תחללו את שם קודשי. The mitzvah is, we're learning in Derech Mitzvotecha, we're page Lamed Daled, 34, not to do something that would cause God's name or the name of heaven to be desecrated.
I think a great word would be disgraced.
Disgraced is fine. Whatever you want, because he's going to... Because in Hebrew it means something entirely different, and we'll see in a second. You already know. שנאמר ולא תחללו את שם קודשי, you shall not desecrate my name. That's mitzvah reis tzadik hey in the chinuch. ועניין חילול השם הוא הפך קידוש השם. Obviously, desecrating God's name or desecrating God is the opposite of sanctifying God. שנצטווינו בו, which we saw the commandment of שקדם ביאורו in the explanation that was before this. והעוון הזה יחלק לג' חלקים. And this prohibition divides into three parts. Ad kan l'shnot. This is what the chinuch says. Ad kan l'shon Rambam. That's what the Rambam says. And it's in the Sefer Mitzvos. Lo ta'aseh siman samech gimel. Yuyan v'rav b'chinuch sham. And so you should see, he sends us to look there and see what he says and what the chinuch says. We're not going to look inside. Hinei yadua, now comes the Tzemach Tzedek himself, and he says like this: Hinei yadua, the Or Ein Sof Baruch Hu haya memale kol hachalal, she'ata bo ha'olamot. So we know that before, what we call the emanation, we're not going to call it creation. Why are we not going to call it creation? Because creation is what's described in the Torah. We want to talk about what the Arizal, what Kabbalah talks about, which is called emanation. Emanation is atzilut. Creation is bria. So it's known that the light of the infinite means the revelation of God's infinite aspect, filled all of, here we'll call it space. Okay? Okay? So before, everything was filled with the revelation of God's infinite nature, infinite aspect. What does that mean? So people sometimes, they read this as everything was full of light, which is a misreading of it entirely. It's not some very spiritual thing here. It's a very philosophical thing. He's trying to say that all that there was, whatever space there was, whatever universe there was, and it could be that there was everything, was of an infinite aspect. Everything you would find in this universe, whatever it was infinite in its aspect.
Light hasn't been invented yet.
So we would say,
Light hasn't been invented.
Right, when we say light, we mean something physical, photons, so on and so forth. We'll see in a moment why that can't, it's not even shaykh. But we always explain, light means a revelation of. Or means not the physical light. We're not talking about anything physical here. We're talking about whatever there was of an infinite nature. So, for example, there was energy, let's say. The energy was infinite. Everywhere you pointed, everywhere you looked, there was an infinite revelation of energy, because God's infinite aspect was being revealed everywhere. So whatever there was of an infinite nature. We have something very close to that today. Because thanks to Einstein, we say that every point of matter, any amount of matter, has an incredible amount of energy, which for all intents and purposes you could call maybe infinite. So why is it that we don't experience this infinite energy everywhere? Because, like you just said, it went through some kind of contraction. It was placed in some kind of vessel that reveals God's finite aspect. Okay. Another example would be, we said we have to give two parables. Oh, so let's say now. So we said we have to give two examples for everything to explain it. So a physical example would be like that somehow the energy is held today within the matter, within the mass in some way. So there's an infinite, let's call it infinite, even though it's not completely infinite. But let's say that it's infinite, but somehow it's held together in something very finite, in a finite amount of mass. The same thing would be true about the Torah. The Torah, before Hashem gave it, was infinite. How do I know that it was infinite? Because God had to contract it. He had to take the infinite aspect of the Torah and put it within vessels, within some kind of vessels. So what do we get? We have white, we call it white background. In the Torah scroll, there's the white background. That represents the infinite nature. And the black letters are some concentrated form of that. So that somehow the infinite is now placed into the finite. We said that this is just what we just read on Shabbos. That this is what it says, this is what it means when it says, "Vayidaber Elokim et kol hadvarim ha'ele lemor," that God spoke all these things saying. What is that opening sentence about? Because right away he says it's not Elokim, he says it's Havaya. Anochi Havaya Elokecha. I am Havaya, your God. So what he means to say, it says in Chasidut, the Alter Rebbe explains, is that Hashem took his infinite nature and he contracted it into the letters of the Torah. And that's why you have to have Elokim. Elokim is the name of contraction. It's the name that limits. So that's what he did. He limited it in some way. So everything was filled, whatever there was of an infinite nature, even the Torah. One more parable we have to give, in the human being himself. Every point of the soul is infinite, but we don't experience it that way. If we would experience it that way, we wouldn't be able to function in this world. Okay? Every point of the soul, whatever you take of the soul, is infinite by nature because it's a part of God above. Especially when we're talking about the divine soul, but it's true about all the souls. How is it that I can function and like I feel I'm not blowing apart? I feel I'm under control. I don't feel that the things are falling apart because I'm too infinite, right? All the superheroes, they're too infinite. Something wrong with them. They can't contain their energy, as it were. So the reason is because there's some kind of contraction even in the soul. There's something that's limiting that infinite, the revelation of that infinite character, that infinite aspect, and even in the soul, is being limited in some way. So everything was filled with God's infinite aspect, which later became where the worlds stand. And worlds in Hebrew means something that conceals. So the worlds conceal this infinite aspect. And when God wanted to create a world, and again a world from the meaning of something that is limited, that is concealing, so he had to limit himself. What is this contraction, this limiting that he did? He revealed a halal u'makom panui, a void and an empty space. Void and empty of what? Of his infinite aspect. Meaning he removed the infinite aspect. It doesn't mean there was nothing there. It just means that the infinite aspect was now in every point of that reality, whatever that reality was, the infinite aspect was now concealed. You could not see it. And then he took a ray and a thread of the light that is above this void and inserted it into the void. So what are we saying? That he reintroduced the infinite into this place where the infinite is concealed. So what do we have? That before the infinite was everywhere. Now the infinite is only where he reveals it. Because now he has like a prodding fork that he pushes in, and where he touches, that's where it's infinite. But everything else, the infinite is concealed in it. ומן הקו הזה שורש כל האורות. And from this thread, this line, this ray, is the root of all the lights. And lights here again means revelation. What kind of revelation? Revelation of God's infinite aspect. ומן החלל והרשים הוא שורש הכלים. And from the void, and here it's called the residue. How did he suddenly get to residue? So he says, even though the infinite aspect was concealed, it's still there. There's residue of it. So the residue, it doesn't shine, but there's some residue of it. You still feel it in some sense. So from those aspects, from the void and the residue, they become the root of what we call the vessels. The vessels that will then contain the light that's coming in through the ray of light. Okay, in any case, so that's well known. All this is he just repeated what the Arizal says at the beginning of Eitz Chaim. And as we know, this contraction, this hiding, concealment of the infinite aspect is not absolute. It doesn't mean that it's gone, it's just concealed. Rather, that should not be revealed openly, only in what we call a makif. A makif would mean that it can be only sensed as something transcendent, but it's not immanent, it's not within the reality itself. That's what, that it's not within the experience of the world itself. You always feel it, or you always experience it as something detached, as something that's coming from the outside, you would call it. A makif is, again, surrounding light. What we mean always by surrounding is that there's no integration. You can't experience it directly. You only experience it as something transcendent, something that's above. In the same way that when you now we're inside the building, so you think about the fact that there's a heaven above us. But the heaven doesn't shine inside this building. There's no experience of it. We don't feel it in any way. But we know that it's there. It's transcendent. It doesn't bear anything on us. We don't. But it's there. We know that it's there. Yeah. So, or for instance, the higher levels of the soul. So we have no experience of them, but we know they exist, and they affect us in some transcendent way. So in the ancient times, they used to say that the stars in the zodiac and the planets, they affect us in some kind of makif type of way. There's no direct relationship. It's not like you could measure any kind of even today. There's no measure that would mean anything of stars having any effect on us, unless you suddenly get some kind of ridiculous star that we don't know about that is going to be freeing massive amounts of radiation into space and somehow would affect us. But there's no such thing really. Nothing really affects us, so the effect is negligible. But is it not there? It's there. So that's what they claimed in order to say that that's what they call the transcendent effect. So all this there's nothing new here. He's just repeating everything that we know. And that's what we call Hanikra Kodesh. That's what we mean when we refer to something as being sacred, something as being holy. As we explained earlier 4 weeks ago when we were learning the commandment to sanctify God. So what's sanctifying? The sanctification is the makif. The sanctification is the transcendent existence of God's infinite nature, which is still affecting in some way, but again in a detached way. And the ray of light that comes in is what we call what becomes, what's the root, what becomes the integrated light, the light that fills. And all this has been explained in a full fashion elsewhere. And so now tomorrow we'll finish this up because it's very short, and we'll see what it means then to create a desecration of God's name. Okay? So that's the background that's needed. But all this background is well known. So we haven't said anything new.